Pete Buttigieg has what could be one of the most important jobs in the country, though he isn't doing it. Co-editor of the American Prospect and professor at Brandeis University's Heller School, Bob Kuttner, is here to talk with us about his latest article on Transportation Secretary Buttigieg. Bob, welcome to Rising.
Thank you for having me.
And so, talk a little bit about your assessment of Buttigieg's kind of no-show transportation secretaryship so far.
Well, it's interesting. It isn't quite a no-show transportation secretaryship. I mean, the relatively easy stuff, like pumping out money under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, he's all too happy to do, and he has played a pretty decent role in the supply chain area, where DOT has a role to play. But he really has not done much with the airline mess, which is the biggest single mess. And despite airline deregulation, which was enacted in 1978, Congress left the Transportation Department and the FAA with a fair degree of residual power to go after abusive actions by the airlines. So here the airlines took $60 billion in bailouts, right, at the beginning of the pandemic to keep the transportation system flying. And part of the deal was that they wouldn't lay off staff. So the airlines got around that by creating incentives for pilots to take early retirement so they could save money on staffing costs. And the big abuse right now is last-minute cancellations. There were 2,700 cancellations over Memorial Day weekend. There are going to be more last-minute cancellations over 4th of July weekend. And the reason for these cancellations is that the airlines are saving money by not having adequate crews, and that mostly means pilots. And it's not because of a pilot shortage. It's because there are plenty of pilots, but the airlines won't put the pilots on their payroll while they're retraining them to put them where they're needed. And before the pandemic, you had spare crews. So if there was a weather delay and a crew couldn't get to where it was needed, the airline could bring in another crew. The other thing the airlines do is when they cancel a flight, they're supposed to give you your money back. What the airlines try to do is they try to get passengers to take credits so that the airlines keep the money until the time that the passenger books a new flight. And Buttigieg has the power to go after all of this, but he's been AWOL. I mean, I looked up his 60 most recent speeches, and he talked about everything except abuses in the airlines. And, a cynic might say that this is because he's running for president and he doesn't want to take on a powerful industry. But, geez, you would think, given how frustrated consumers are and given that the Biden administration is looking for everything it possibly can find to demonstrate that it's on the side of consumers against abusive industries, Buttigieg would be on the front lines of this.
Well, and especially considering the incredible amount of money that we subsidized the airline industry with over the last couple of years. And on that question, one of the reasons we wanted to talk about this article, which I thought was just absolutely fantastic, is because people are going to be facing this throughout the next week. It's a holiday week. Summer travel in general has been upended. Can you tell us why you think it is? I mean, you do a great job of pointing out what the problem is and the fact that Buttigieg has the power exists. Can you get into a little bit more of why you think Pete Buttigieg isn't using it?
Well, if I were being cynical, I would say that he's running for president. I mean, this is pretty obvious. The Post a couple of months ago, ranked the most likely nominees in 2024. Biden ranked first. Buttigieg was ranked second, ahead of Kamala Harris. And so if you look at his speeches, they're on every conceivable subject other than the airlines. So that tells you something about how he's playing this. I don't want to psychologize his motivation, but just based on what he's talking about, it looks like this is a man with a much broader interest in what I called his day job. There are also some tricky legal questions. I mean, the problem with the Transportation Department, going back to 1938, when the airlines were first regulated, it's one part promoting the airline industry, and it's one part protecting consumers. And over the years, DOT and the FAA have become a kind of a captured agency where their primary loyalty is to the airline industry when it ought to be to the flying public. And so I think he's up against an entrenched subculture that is very much pro-industry. There's a kind of revolving door. A lot of people go to work for FAA, then they go to work for the industry for a lot more money. And he would have to really take that on. He'd have to be fairly aggressive in taking on some legal challenges. There was an episode in 2010 when Ray LaHood, who was actually a Republican, who was Barack Obama's transportation secretary, went after the airlines. Remember the tarmac delays where you would get out on the tarmac, and then for whatever reason, the plane wouldn't be able to take off, and they wouldn't let you go back to the gate. And there were tarmac delays as long as 12 hours with no food, no water, toilets not working, screaming babies. And LaHood finally said, I'm just going to use my residual power as transportation secretary. I'm going to issue a rule. I'm going to fine the airlines $27,500 for every single passenger who's on a plane on the tarmac for longer than 3 hours. And the airlines went along with it. So I guess my question is, LaHood was a Republican. These abuses are every bit as bad as the tarmac abuses. I mean, they're cancellations based on schedules that the airlines publish that they don't have enough crews to meet. And this is an abuse. So I would think Buttigieg would be at least as aggressive as Ray LaHood.
And Buttigieg recently met with a bunch of airline executives, and then right after that meeting, his own flight back to Washington, D.C. was canceled. Is there anything we can read from the combination of those things? Is there a sense that maybe he's finally getting the importance of this?
I think he's getting some pushback. I mean, I think he's getting some pushback from the consumer groups. I think he's getting some unflattering press, and he's accustomed mostly to flattering press. The fact that his own flight was canceled, he experienced this firsthand. And, you know, that meeting with the airlines executives was very much of a low-key, can't you guys do a little bit better? It wasn't a public statement attacking them, criticizing them, threatening to do a wholesale investigation of their fraudulent staffing. So you would think at this point, especially if this happens again over 4th of July weekend, and there's no way it isn't. I mean, this is a structural problem. They can't fix this on a week's notice. Maybe he'll become more aggressive.
You would think.
I guess we'll see, Bob. Hopefully he reads your piece and says, maybe I need to do something about this. We appreciate you joining us here.
Thanks so much.
And we'll have more Rising right after this.